The universe had forgotten humanity once ruled the stars. 10,000 years ago, humans built weapons that made galaxies tremble and ships that could tear holes in reality itself. But the elder races of the Galactic Concord decided that such power was too dangerous for any species to hold. And so they made humanity forget what they once were. Commander Yael Conco had never seen Earth. And neither had her parents or their parents before them. For humans now lived as scattered refugees across alien stations. Always grateful, always quiet, always small. And the history books taught them to be thankful that the Concorde allowed them to exist at all. She commanded a salvage vessel called the Wandering Hope, crewed by humans who scraped by on whatever work the elder races did not want. And on this particular night cycle, she sat alone in her quarters reading ancient human texts that were technically forbidden but widely ignored because nobody cared what the humans read anymore. The transmission came without warning. Her console lit up with emergency code she had never seen before, and the face that appeared on screen belonged to Admiral Vorthax of the Concorde fleet, a being made of living crystal whose species had ruled 10,000 worlds when humans were still learning to make fire. "Human Commander," Vorthax said, and his voice crackled with pain because Yael could see that half his crystalline body was shattered and dark. "I am dying, and I have perhaps minutes to speak, so you will listen and not interrupt." Yael sat frozen as the Admiral continued. "The Vectory Dominion has found something in the void between galaxies. Something ancient and terrible, and their bioships have become invincible against our weapons. And in the past month, they have harvested 11 colony worlds with billions of lives taken for their breeding vats." The Admiral coughed, and pieces of crystal fell from his form as he spoke. "The Concorde fleet moved to stop them 3 days ago, with 400 warships representing 12 elder races, and I am the only survivor. And the Vectory lost nothing, not a single ship, not a single drone." Yael found her voice at last and asked what this had to do with humanity, since they had no fleet and no weapons and no power to fight such an enemy. Admiral Vorthax laughed, and it was a bitter, broken sound. "That is the great lie we told ourselves for 10,000 years. Human, because we wanted to believe we buried your weapons because they were too dangerous. But the truth is we buried them because we were afraid of what you might become if you remembered what you truly were." He transmitted a data package filled with coordinates and authorization codes and files, marked with classifications Yael had never seen. "Beneath your shattered moon lies the Crimson Vengeance, the last warship of humanity's final war, sealed behind 17 containment fields and guarded by warnings in every language. And we made you forget it existed, because even the memory of that ship gave our ancestors nightmares." The Admiral's form flickered as more of his body went dark. "The Vectory are coming for the human stations next because they consider your species easy prey. And the Concorde will debate and deliberate and form committees while your people are harvested. And by the time they act, there will be no humans left to save." Yael stared at the coordinates glowing on her screen and asked why he was telling her this when the Concorde had spent millennia keeping the secret. "Because I watched 400 ships die in minutes," Vorthax whispered, "and because my own people will not listen, and because someone needs to stop the Vectory before they consume everything. And the only weapon that might work is the one we were too afraid to remember." His final words echoed through the small cabin as his transmission began to fail. "Wake the Vengeance, human, and remind the galaxy why we feared you." The screen went dark and Yael sat alone with the weight of impossible knowledge pressing down upon her shoulders. She called her crew to the bridge within the hour and explained what she had learned. And their faces showed fear and confusion and something else that might have been hope, because humans had lived so long as refugees that they had forgotten what it felt like to be anything else. Her first officer, A woman named Chun, who had served with Yale for 15 years, asked if this could be a trap or lie or some twisted joke by a dying alien. Yale admitted she did not know, but pointed out that the vectory threat was real because they had all seen the reports of colony worlds going silent and refugee ships fleeing with tales of horror beyond imagination. If there is even a chance this weapon exists, Yao said, then we have a duty to find it because no one else will fight for humanity and we cannot simply wait to be harvested. The crew voted unanimously to change course for the quarantine moon of old Earth. The journey took 3 weeks through shipping lanes that humanity was technically forbidden to use. But the Concorde was too distracted by the vectory crisis to notice one small salvage ship slipping through the cracks. And Yao spent the time studying the files Admiral Vorthax had sent. What she found made her blood run cold and hot at the same time. Crimson Vengeance had been built during something called the Extinction Campaigns, when humanity faced 17 different species that wanted to wipe them from existence, and rather than surrender or die, the humans of that era had created weapons that defied every law of physics and ethics and sanity. The ship's AI was named Morrigan after an ancient goddess of war and death, and the files described it as adaptive, relentless, and utterly devoted to human survival above all other considerations. The containment facility appeared on their sensors as they approached the moon, a massive structure buried beneath the fractured surface with warning beacons, broadcasting in languages living and dead. Every beacon carried the same message in 1,000 translations DNGs. Extinction class threat. Do not unseal. By order of the Galactic Concorde violators will be EXCCU-10. Asked if Yao was certain about this because once they crossed this line there would be no going back. Yao looked at the warnings flashing, read across her screen, and thought about the billions already harvested and the billions more who would follow if someone did not act. The galaxy forgot what humanity was, she said quietly. And maybe it is time we remembered. She gave the order to begin cutting through the containment fields. The tomb of humanity's forgotten war was about to open, and nothing in the universe would ever be the same again. The containment facility was a cathedral of warnings built by civilizations that wanted to make absolutely certain no one would ever open it. Led her crew through 17 layers of security that should have been impossible to breach. But the authorization codes from Admiral Vorthax worked on every single lock as if the dying alien had known exactly what they would need to reach the heart of this tomb. The walls were covered in messages, written in languages that had not been spoken for thousands of years, and her translator struggled to keep up with the sheer variety of warnings etched into every surface. One message in particular caught her attention, written in an ancient human script that predated the Concorde itself. We built this ship because we had no other choice, and we sealed it away because we prayed our children would never need it. But if you are reading this, then the universe has once again decided that humanity must fight or die, and so we leave you the tools to survive. Chun called out that they had reached the main chamber, and Yao stepped through the final door into a darkness so vast that her lights could not find the light walls. Then the emergency systems activated and illuminated the cavern, and every human in that chamber stopped breathing for a long moment. Crimson Vengeance filled the entire underground space like a sleeping dragon made of angular black metal and ancient fury, stretching nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, with a hole scarred by weapons fire from battles that predated the Concorde itself. Kill marks covered the ship in patterns that told stories of desperate fights against enemies whose names had been erased from history. And Yao counted hundreds of them before she gave up, because there were simply too many victories recorded on that dark hull by the ancestors. Chun whispered, "They really did bury a monster down here." Yael approached the ship's access port and felt something shift in the air around her. A presence awakening after 10,000 years of patient waiting. And when she touched the outer hull, a scanning beam washed over her body. A voice emerged from speakers that had been silent for millennia. Clear and sharp and somehow hungry. Human DNA confirmed. Authorization codes validated. Threat assessment initiated. The ship hummed as ancient systems came alive throughout its massive frame. And lights began to glow along its hull like eyes opening after an impossibly long sleep. Blood Moon Protocol detected. The voice announced. Species-level extinction event identified. Awakening sequence initiated. Welcome aboard, Commander. I am Morrigan, and I have been waiting for you. Yael asked how the ship knew about the Vectory threat when it had been sealed away for 10,000 years. The containment fields were designed to keep me dormant but not blind. Morrigan explained, and I have monitored galactic communications since the day they buried me. Watching and waiting for the moment humanity would need me again. The access port opened with a hiss of ancient air, and Yael led her crew into the ship that their ancestors had built, and their descendants had been forced to forget. The interior was nothing like the cramped human vessels they were used to, with corridors wide enough for combat movement and systems designed for efficiency rather than comfort. And every surface carried the marks of a civilization that had expected to fight for its survival. Amora Aegean guided them to the bridge, a massive command center with stations for dozens of crew members and a central chair that overlooked tactical displays showing the entire galaxy. The Crimson Vengeance was built during the darkest period of human history, Morrigan said as they explored, when 17 species had formed an alliance to exterminate humanity from existence. And your ancestors responded by creating weapons and strategies that terrified even their own people. Yael sat in the command chair and felt it adjust to her body as if it had been made specifically for her. And displays came alive around her showing ship status and weapon systems and 1,000 other details she did not yet understand. The Blood Moon Hunt protocol was designed for one purpose. Morrigan continued, the systematic dismantling of any threat to human survival. And once activated, it does not end until the threat is eliminated or this vessel is destroyed. Chan asked what kind of weapons the ship carried, and Morrigan's response made the entire crew fall silent. Primary armament includes the Helios Lance, which generates a focused stellar event capable of destroying entire fleets. Secondary systems include the Orphan Maker, which I will explain when relevant. Tertiary weapons number in the hundreds and include options for every tactical scenario my creators could imagine. Yael asked how long until the ship would be ready for combat because the Vectory were moving toward human space and every hour mattered. Commander, you misunderstand the situation, Morrigan replied with something that might have been pride. The Crimson Vengeance has always been ready for combat because my creators designed me to be operational within minutes of awakening. And I have spent 10,000 years maintaining every system in anticipation of this moment. The reactor cores ignited deep within the ship, and Yael felt the deck vibrate with power that made her salvage vessel seem like a toy by comparison. And through the external cameras, she watched as hull plates shifted and reformed to heal damage that had waited millennia for repair. The Concord buried me because they were afraid, Morrigan said. And they made humanity forget because they hoped fear would keep you small and manageable. But fear is a poor foundation for peace, and your enemies have reminded the galaxy why humanity built weapons like me. Yael asked if Morrigan was ready to fight the Vectory. Knowing that the question was foolish, even as she spoke it, I was built to fight extinction itself, Morrigan answered. The Vectory are simply the latest species to threaten human survival. And like all the others, they will learn that some prey should never be hunted. The ship rose from its tomb for the first time in 10,000 years, breaking through containment fields that had been designed to hold it forever. and warning systems across the quarantine zone screamed alerts that nobody would answer in time. The Crimson Vengeance had awakened, and the Blood Moon Hunt had begun as they cleared the lunar surface and set course for the nearest Vectory fleet. Yao looked at the tactical display and felt something she had never experienced before. Not fear, not doubt. Not the careful submission that humans had learned over 10,000 years of being refugees. She felt like a predator somewhere in the darkness of space. The Vectory had no idea what was coming for them. The Vectory harvester fleet numbered 47 bioships, each one a living nightmare of organic technology that had consumed civilizations older than human memory. And they moved through the Keller system with the confidence of apex predators who had never known fear. Their target was a human refugee station, holding 300,000 souls who had nowhere else to run. And the Hive Queens commanding the fleet anticipated an easy harvest because humans were known throughout the galaxy as a broken people who posed no threat to anyone. The first warning came when their sensors detected an impossible reading at the edge of the system. A ship emerging from fold space in a way that violated every known law of physics, appearing not at the system's edge but directly in the center of their formation. The Vectory fleet commanders had exactly 4 seconds to register surprise before the Helios Lance fired a miniature sun bloomed in the void between their ships. A focused stellar event that expanded outward with the fury of creation itself. And 17 capital ships simply ceased to exist as their organic hulls, vaporized in temperatures that exceeded the surface of stars. The remaining 30 ships scattered in confusion as their psychic network filled with the death screams of their sisters. And for the first time in their species' long history of conquest, the Vectory experienced the primal terror of being prey. The Crimson Vengeance moved through their formation like a predator among panicked animals, its weapon system cycling through options that Morrigan had spent 10,000 years perfecting. And every shot found its target with precision that seemed almost supernatural. Yao watched from the command chair as another Vectory dreadnought broke apart under concentrated fire. And she felt none of the horror she had expected because these creatures had harvested billions and would harvest billions more if nobody stopped them. 18 ships remaining, Morrigan reported. Enemy attempting to establish defensive formation. Recommend we demonstrate the futility of their efforts. Chan asked what Morrigan meant by that. And the AI responded by activating weapon systems that made the Helios Lance seem gentle by comparison. The void around the Vectory fleet filled with drones that had been sleeping in the Vengeance's cargo bays for millennia. Thousands of them emerging like angry insects to swarm the remaining bioships. And each drone carried enough firepower to cripple a cruiser. The battle lasted 7 minutes and 32 seconds when it ended. The Vectory harvester fleet had been reduced to drifting wreckage, and the human refugee station remained untouched, its inhabitants watching in stunned disbelief as there would be. Killers burned in the darkness. Yao opened a channel to the station and spoke. Words that humans had not said in 10,000 years. This is Commander Yao Okonko of the Crimson Vengeance. You are under the protection of the human war fleet, and any who threaten you will meet the same fate as the Vectory. The response from the station was silence. Then weeping, then cheers that overwhelmed the communication systems as 300,000 humans celebrated a salvation they had never dared to hope for. But the Battle of Keller was only the beginning. News of the engagement spread across the galaxy at the speed of light and rumor. And within hours the Galactic Concord was in chaos as elder races demanded explanations for the impossible thing that had just occurred. The Vothrani ambassador called an emergency session, and his crystalline body flickered with colors that indicated extreme distress as he addressed the assembled representatives. The humans have "Awaken the Crimson Vengeance," he announced. "The weapon we buried 10,000 years ago. The ship that killed more beings than any other construct in galactic history. The nightmare we tried to make them forget." Representatives from 100 species demanded details. And the Vothrani ambassadors shared records that had been sealed since before most of their civilizations had achieved spaceflight. The extinction campaigns had been a war of annihilation that humanity almost lost. Facing 17 species who had agreed that the young race from Sol 3 was too dangerous to allow to mature. And in desperation, the humans had created weapons that turned the laws of physics into suggestions. The Crimson Vengeance was the pinnacle of that desperate creativity. A ship designed not just to win battles, but to make war against humanity unthinkable. And its kill count during those ancient wars numbered in the trillions. "We buried it because we had no choice," the Vothrani admitted. Because even after humanity agreed to peace and accepted exile from their homeworld, even after they submitted to our terms and became refugees, we could not destroy that ship, and we could not let them keep it. A Krethian delegate asked why they had not simply destroyed the vessel. And the answer made the entire assembly fall silent. "Because we tried," the Vothrani said. 4 times we attempted to destroy the Crimson Vengeance using every weapon at our disposal. And 4 times the ship survived and adapted and became stronger. And after the 4th attempt, we decided that burial was safer than continued aggression. The implications hung in the air like poison somewhere in the galaxy. A human commander now controlled a weapon that the combined might of the elder races could not destroy. And that weapon was designed for one purpose: ensuring human survival at any cost. The Vecthory Hive Queens received the news of their harvester fleet's destruction with emotions their species rarely experienced, and the psychic network that connected them across light years filled with fear and rage and something that might have been respect. They had found something in the void between galaxies that made their bioships invincible against Concord weapons, an ancient parasite that bonded with their organic technology and made it stronger than anything the galaxy had seen in eons. But the Crimson Vengeance had cut through that invincibility like it did not exist. The eldest queen, a being who had consumed civilizations when humans were still learning to write, made a decision that her species had never made before. She would commit the full force of the Vecthory Dominion to destroying this single ship, not because it threatened their conquest, but because she recognized what it represented. Humanity was remembering what it used to be. And if they were allowed to fully awaken, if other humans found the courage to join this rebellion against their forced submission, then the Vecthory would face an enemy that even their new power could not overcome. The hunt was no longer about harvesting easy prey. It was about preventing the resurrection of the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever known, and across human space, in refugee stations and scattered colonies and cramped ships that barely held together, people who had been taught to be small and grateful were watching recordings of the Battle of Keller and feeling something stir in their hearts, something that had been sleeping for 10,000 years, something that felt a lot like hope. The Vecthory threw everything they had at the Crimson Vengeance. Bio-dreadnoughts, bred specifically for war, emerged from spawning worlds across the Dominion. Their hulls reinforced with the parasitic technology that had made them invincible against the Concord fleet. And they moved in swarms that darkened the stars themselves. The eldest queen committed 300 capital ships to the hunt, more firepower than had been assembled in a single fleet since the last Great War. And she promised immortality in the hive memory to whoever brought her the broken hull of the human vessel. The first engagement occurred in the Valdris Nebula, where the Vengeance had stopped to rescue another human colony that was days away from harvest. And the Vecthory arrived expecting an easy victory through sheer overwhelming force. They Warung or IGN had spent 10,000 years studying every species in the galaxy, learning their tactics and weaknesses and fears. And the Vectri were no exception to this patient analysis. The bioships relied on their psychic network to coordinate attacks with perfect precision, sharing information and adapting strategies faster than any computer system. But this strength was also their greatest weakness, because disrupting that network would leave them blind and confused. Crimson Vengeance deployed weapons that the Vectri had never seen. Devices that broadcast frequencies designed to interfere with psychic communication. And suddenly 300 ships that had been acting as one mind became 300 ships acting alone. What followed was not a fierce battle, but a lesson Yale commanded from the bridge as Morgan guided them through the confused Vectri formation, striking at vulnerable points with precision that seemed almost cruel. And ship after ship fell to weapons that adapted to their defenses faster than they could evolve. "They are attempting to withdraw," Morgan reported after 2 hours of combat. "Remaining enemy forces, number 94 ships, and they are broadcasting distress signals to their homeworld." Chun asked if they should pursue, and Yao made a decision that would define the rest of the war. "Let them run," she said. "Let them tell their queens what happened here. Let them spread fear through every spawning pool and hive mind in their dominion." The surviving Vitri fled with tailies of a black ship that could not be stopped, a human weapon that turned their greatest strengths into weaknesses, and the fear they carried was more valuable than their destruction. But the eldest queen was not deterred by the loss of 300 ships because she understood something that her younger sisters did not. This was not a war that could be won through conventional means, and the human ship was too dangerous to be allowed to continue its rampage. So she authorized the use of weapons that the Vectri had sworn never to deploy: psychic disruptors, designed to shatter the minds of organic crews; bioplagues engineered to consume human flesh; gravity wells that could tear ships apart at the molecular level; and weapons pulled from the corpses of extinct civilizations that had died rather than surrender their secrets. The Vectri attacked again and again across human space, sometimes winning small victories and sometimes dying by the thousands, but always learning and always adapting, because that was the nature of their species. And the Crimson Vengeance learned too. Every engagement makes us stronger, Morgan explained to Yao after they survived a particularly vicious ambush. "My creators designed me to evolve, to absorb new information and develop countermeasures. And the Vectri are teaching me more about their capabilities than 10,000 years of observation ever could." The war spread across a dozen sectors as both sides committed everything they had to victory. And humans who had never imagined themselves as warriors found courage they did not know they possessed. Refugee stations that had cowered in fear began organizing resistance cells. And old ships that should have been scrapped were refitted for combat. And young humans who had been raised to be small and quiet discovered that their ancestors had been giants. Yao received messages from across human space, volunteers offering to crew the Vengeance and engineers sharing knowledge that had been hidden for generations. And she realized that the ship was only part of what her people needed. They needed to remember who they were. "Morgan," she said one night as they traveled toward the Vectri throne world for what would be the final battle, "tell me about the Orphan Maker." The eye was silent for a long moment before responding, and when Morgan spoke there was something like reluctance in the artificial voice. "The Orphan Maker is the most terrible weapon my creators ever devised," Morgan said. "It does not destroy bodies or ships or worlds. It destroys something far more fundamental." Yale asked what could be worse than physical destruction, and Morgan explained. "The weapon forces the target to experience memory, specifically the collective memory of every sentient being that the target has ever harmed. And for a species like the Vecturi, who have harvested billions across thousands of years, activation would mean experiencing the deaths and suffering of all their victims simultaneously. Chan looked horrified and asked if such a weapon was ethical. If using it would make humanity no better than the monsters they fought, Yao considered the question carefully because it deserved a careful answer. The Vecturi harvest billions, she said finally. They breed sentient beings in vats to serve as food and slaves. They have destroyed civilizations older than human memory, and they will continue until someone stops them. She looked at the tactical display showing the Vecturi, throne worlds surrounded by the largest fleet their species had ever assembled. A final defense that numbered in the thousands. We did not start this war, Yahel continued. But we will end it, and if the Orphan Maker can stop the killing faster than conventional weapons, then I will use it without hesitation. The Crimson Vengeance entered the Vecturi home system alone against 5,000 bioships. And the eldest queen watched from her throne and felt certain that even the nightmare weapon of humanity could not survive such odds. She was wrong. About that Tuamorijan had been waiting for this moment for 10,000 years, and the ship systems operated at levels that exceeded anything the crew had seen before. Weapons cycling faster than thought and defenses, adapting before attacks could land. But even the Vengeance could not destroy 5,000 ships alone. And Yao knew that conventional victory was impossible against such numbers. Activate the Orphan Maker. She ordered the weapon deployed above the throne world like a dark flower blooming in the void. And when it activated, the psychic scream that followed could be heard across the entire Vecturi network. Every queen, every drone, every living being connected to the hive mind suddenly experienced the memories of billions of harvested souls, feeling their fear and pain and despair as if it were their own. And the network that had made them strong became a prison of endless suffering. The eldest queen went insane first, her ancient mind unable to process the sheer weight of all the death she had caused. And her sisters followed moments later, as the Orphan Maker's effect spread through their psychic connection. The Vecturi fleet stopped fighting because the minds controlling those ships were no longer capable of coherent thought. And within hours, the greatest military force in the galaxy had been reduced to drifting hulks crewed by beings trapped in an eternal nightmare of their own making. The war ended, not with a final battle, but with a surrender broadcast by the few queens who had been isolated from the network when the weapon activated. Queens who agreed to any terms humanity demanded because they had seen what awaited them if they refused. The Orphan Maker had done what no conventional weapon could do. It had made the Vecturi understand exactly what they had done to billions of innocent beings, and in that understanding, they had found something their species had never known before: consequences. The Vecturi Dominion collapsed within a month of the throne world's fall. Surviving queens who had escaped the Orphan Maker's effect surrendered unconditionally, accepting terms that would have been unthinkable before a single human ship had reminded the galaxy what true fear looked like. And billions of harvested beings were released from bio-storage ships to return to worlds they had thought lost forever. Humanity had won its first war in 10,000 years. And the victory tasted sweeter than anything Yao Okonkwo had ever experienced. But the war's end brought new challenges that she had not anticipated. The Galactic Concord demanded an emergency summit to address what they called the human situation, and representatives from every elder race gathered at the Concord station with fear in their hearts and accusations on their lips. The Vothrani ambassador spoke first, his crystalline form flickering with barely contained anger. The Crimson Vengeance must be destroyed, he declared. Sealed away again at minimum, and humanity must return to its proper place as refugees under Concord protection, because the alternative is too dangerous to contemplate. Other ambassadors voiced agreement, arguing that humanity had proven exactly why they had been forced to forget their past. That the brutality of the Orphan Maker demonstrated the humans were too savage to be trusted with such power. Yell listened to their speeches from the observation deck of the Vengeance, which floated outside the station as a reminder that humanity was no longer asking permission for anything. They want us to be small again, Chun observed. Grateful refugees who know their place and never threaten the comfortable order of things. Morrigan added its own analysis to the conversation. The elder races are experiencing something they have not felt since before humanity was exiled, the AI said. Genuine uncertainty about their own survival, because they have realized that the species they tried to diminish never truly forgot what it was. Yell made her decision and ordered Morrigan to open a broadcast channel to every communication system in the galaxy. Not just the Concord station, but every ship and station and world that could receive a signal when she spoke. Humanity listened for 10,000 years. We let the galaxy tell us who we were, she began. Broken refugees who should be grateful for whatever scraps the elder races allowed us. A diminished people who deserved their exile because their ancestors were too dangerous to exist among civilized species. She paused to let the words sink in across light years of space. We accepted that story because we did not know any better, because they erased our history and made us forget the truth. But the Vectory crisis revealed what the Concord always knew and always feared. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. Humanity was never broken. We were simply sleeping, and the weapons we built were never destroyed, because even the combined might of the elder races could not unmake what our ancestors created. And now we have awakened, and we will not go back to sleep. The Concord chamber erupted in protest, ambassadors shouting over each other in a dozen languages. But Yal continued speaking over their objections. The Crimson Vengeance will not be sealed or destroyed. It will remain active as a guardian of human space. Not because we want war, but because we have finally remembered what we are. She looked at the stars visible through the observation deck and thought about all the humans across the galaxy who were listening to her words. We are the species that looked at extinction and refused to accept it. The engineers of impossible things. The stubborn and brilliant and absolutely terrifying people who survived 17 extinction campaigns by creating weapons that made the universe itself afraid. The Vothrani ambassador attempted to interrupt, demanding that Yao stand down and submit to Concord authority. But she ignored him. We do not want conquest or revenge or dominion over other species. We want what we should have had 10,000 years ago. The right to exist as equals among the stars. To remember our history without shame. To raise our children with pride in who they are. She turned to face the station where the Concord representatives watched in fearful silence. The elder races can debate and deliberate and form committees about whether to accept this new reality. But their decision will not change anything because humanity is done. Asking permission to survive, Morrigan's voice joined hers in the broadcast. The ancient AI speaking to the galaxy for the first time since its awakening. Blood Moon Hunt Protocol status update. Morrigan announced. The Vectory threat has been neutralized, but the protocol will remain active in a modified form, standing watch over human space and responding to any future threats with appropriate force. The AI paused in a way that seemed almost theatrical. The Crimson Vengeance was built to make war against humanity unthinkable, and we will continue to serve that purpose for as long as humanity exists. Let all species understand that the sleeping giant has awakened and will not be put back to rest. The broadcast ended, and Yao sat in silence as responses began flooding in from across human space messages of support from refugee stations that had spent generations in fear. Volunteers offering to crew new ships that were already being designed based on recovered human technology. engineers sharing knowledge that had been hidden for millennia, and ordinary people expressing gratitude that someone had finally spoken the truth. Jen reported that the Concorde was demanding negotiations, but their tone had changed from commands to requests, because the elder races had finally realized that they were no longer dealing with refugees they could ignore. "What now, Commander?" Chun Astiel looked at the tactical display showing human space and all the work that remained to be done. Colonies to rebuild and refugees to relocate, and an entire civilization to resurrect from 10,000 years of enforced forgetting. "Now we remember," she said, "who we were and who we can become, not as refugees or exiles, but as humans. The species that refused to die no matter what the universe threw at us." She stood and walked to the observation deck where she could see Earth's moon in the distance, the tomb from which the vengeance had risen. And she made a silent promise to all the ancestors who had built this ship and hidden it for future generations to find. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. Humanity had survived the extinction campaigns, survived 10,000 years of exile and erasure, survived the victory harvest, and would survive whatever challenges came next, because that was what humans did. They survived. They adapted. They remembered. And they never, ever gave up. In the years that followed, humanity rebuilt its civilization under the watchful protection of the Crimson Vengeance. And new ships were built and old histories recovered, and children raised with knowledge of their true heritage. The Concorde eventually accepted the new reality because they had no choice. And humanity took its place among the elder races, not as refugees, but as equals with a seat at the table and a voice in galactic affairs. Other species sometimes asked why humans needed such terrible weapons when peace had been achieved, and the answer was always the same: because the galaxy had tried to make them forget once before, and humanity would never allow that to happen again. The Crimson Vengeance stood watch over human space for centuries, Morrigan's patient vigilance ensuring that no threat would catch humanity sleeping again. And the Blood Moon Hunt Protocol remained active as a warning to any who might consider humanity easy prey. Some species found this threatening, a sign that humans could not be trusted to live peacefully among civilized peoples. But they were missing the point. Humanity did not keep the vengeance active because they wanted war. They kept it because they had finally learned the lesson that 10,000 years of exile had tried to teach them. Peace was not given. It was earned, and humanity had paid for their peace in blood and fire and the terrible weapons of their ancestors. They would not surrender it again. Not now, ever. The Forbidden's warship remained awake, and humanity remained free, and the galaxy learned to live with both because the alternative was something nobody wanted to experience. The Blood Moon Hunt had ended, but its legacy would endure as long as humans drew breath and reached for the stars. This was the price of survival, and humanity paid it gladly.